Okay, welcome back to council meeting. It's we're a little late. Apologies for getting started. Just coming out of an in-camera meeting, and we are ready to dive back into our council agenda, July 25th meeting. We had said previously that we would bring forward the unfinished business item at 2 o'clock when we reconvened today. So that is the rezoning for 500 to 650 West 57th Avenue, Pearson Dogwood, and on that issue, we had a public hearing on Thursday, July the 20th, 2017. Council concluded hearing from speakers, closed the receipt of public comments, and referred discussion and decision on the application to this regular council meeting on July 25th, 2017 as unfinished business. That's where we are here today. And we had questions. Council could send questions to staff at the close of that public hearing. So staff will begin by hearing from staff with responses to the council questions, and followed by representatives from Vancouver Coastal Health who can answer the health care related questions as well. So we'll open it up to Mr. Graham Winterbottom, who is a planner for Vancouver South, provide responses from the staff side. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Council. So yes, after the public hearing on Thursday, staff received some follow-up questions from Council regarding the proposed Pearson rezoning application. So many of these questions followed up on items raised by speakers at the hearing and sought clarity on the proposed housing model and healthcare supports that are part of, as well as the therapy pool. There were also some questions about the 57th Avenue station as well as the urban farm. So to address these questions, after myself, we're going to have VCH come up and speak to questions regarding what they are proposing, and they'll be represented by Bonnie Wilson. And then followed by this will be city staff from both engineering and the park board. I'll also note that just in response to some of the comments heard at the hearing and the questions received, that staff has circulated a memo to council which amends the conditions of development regarding the pool to remove any consideration of off-site locations. So moving forward, the standing condition of development will be for the delivery of the pool to current standards in phase 1 of the development, and this will be to the satisfaction of the GM of planning. I'll also just point out further conditions in the report relate to consultation between VCH and Pearson residents regarding the unit types, the model of care, and the location of units. So VCH will have to engage with the city at each phase of development to ensure that the residents have been consulted in regard to all these matters. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Vancouver Coastal Health to take you the first round of questions, and Bonnie Wilson.
Welcome.
Thank you. So one of the first questions we had was about the therapeutic pool and about a commitment to have a larger pool. Is there an adequate budget for the building, staffing, and management of the pool? What percentage of current Pearson residents use the pool? And on average, how frequently? If the pool is located off-site, how might this affect residents' access? So I think as we've heard, we've taken that option off the table. To address the issue of whether or not a commitment was made for a larger pool, it's not necessarily that a commitment was made, but when we were designing the pool in conjunction with the Y, the economies of scale were just lending themselves to a larger pool, larger amenities, more space for change rooms. So with us doing that on our own, that option isn't available anymore. So we are going to be designing the pool according to current standards and staffing it as well that way. The second question is it possible to require that the therapeutic pool be provided on-site and easily accessible to Pearson residents? So again, the answer is yes. Another question that came was some speakers said not all current Pearson Lodge residents have been offered a place to live in the replacement building. Can we verify that indeed all existing Pearson residents have been offered residences in the new building? So yes, all residents have been informed that they will have access to one of the 114 units. We've provided this verbally in writing to residents, to families. We haven't been able to offer them a specific unit or a specific phase at this time, but we've assured everyone that they will have the option of one of the units. Next question, what are the reasons behind the decision to not offer larger group living options, example 6 to 12 unit group living? Can this decision be revisited? That's a really tough question. So as you heard, there's incredible diversity of opinion, and I think that what we were trying to do was really walk the middle ground, find the common ground, that middle path. We have extreme views on the issue, with some individuals wanting us to recreate another George Pearson Center, another institution, another facility, and then we have others who say they won't accept anything other than single units. So we really felt that we were coming up with the compromise of the 4 to 6 bedroom units. I think the other middle ground that we were able to find is that many of these units are very closely located within the buildings. So a 4-unit house is right next door to a 6-unit house. So essentially you have a 10-unit setting, but they're just 2 different entrances. And when we created models, and we did work with the architects to create models that had 10-unit houses, unfortunately, we couldn't get around from a very institutional look. So this was, again, our compromise by having smaller sized houses, but in close proximity. So either side by side or stacked on top of each other. So in fact, the residents, to create that sense of community, really have to walk out their front door and into their neighbor's front door, or up an elevator and back down again. So we really feel that we can create a sense of community within the building because these units are in close proximity. Some speakers, so another question that we received, some speakers raised the issue of medical risks in single, 4, or 6-unit groupings. Please comment on the concern. So we feel quite confident that the model of care that we have in place has adequate medical supports and actually has a higher staff to resident ratio than our current model. So we feel that there are no questions or issues about this model's ability to safely meet the needs of the residents that we're planning for. The next question, how many current residents of Pearson are in need of complex medical care versus are fairly independent? Again, this is a very difficult question to answer because it's not a simple 1-to-1 ratio. So we actually have individuals who are very medically complex who are also fairly independent. So, and it's also sensitive in terms of our ability to share that level of detailed information. I think I appreciate that it's trying to get to the bottom of, so to speak, how many units do we need of what kind of housing? And again, really our focus is about individualizing it and not going forward with that cut and dried equation. We received the question, will designs for the urban farm include an enabling garden, including a heated clubhouse and protected access for Pearson residents? I think city staff are going to answer part of that, but we wanted to reiterate that the $8,000 a year of funding that Vancouver Coastal Health currently provides to the farmers will continue. Next question was, how will proposed common spaces and opportunities for art, music therapy, recreation, outings, and other activities offered to Pearson residents compare to what is offered currently? So the 4 and 6 bedroom homes have the same types of common spaces that you or I would have in our own homes, and that's quite intentional. There are living rooms, open kitchens, and outdoor spaces for the residents to recreate in. There's also the opportunity for residents from 2 different homes to come together and enjoy social time. So again, going back to that concept of creating community. The model of care supports the individualized social recreational opportunities as well as group activities. Recreation therapists will identify individual needs and work with the residents and the total support workers to ensure those needs and wishes are met. The total support workers will help the residents to engage in activities of their choice, which is very important. And those activities may be in their home or they may be out in the community. If multiple residents are interested in the same activity, a group activity could be arranged, but it's important to note that this is not to become the default. Individual preference, choice, and community inclusion are the key factors to support all people to participate fully in their lives. The next question was, will Ani Group and Vancouver Coastal Health commit to continuing to consult with the city's seniors and people with disability advisory committees to ensure the consensus agreement is adhered to? And the answer is absolutely yes. So those were the questions that were submitted to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those responses. And we have some more coming.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Neil Peacock from Engineering Services. I'm here to respond to some questions received about the transit. The first question was, what is the projected total cost of building a Canada Line station at 57th Avenue? At this point, we know that the projected total capital cost would exceed the $20 million contribution provided by the developer and would exceed $40 million in a similar contribution if it was negotiated with Langara Gardens to the north. Beyond that, it is very difficult and potentially problematic to establish a total cost number because of it's highly dependent on the actual year it's built. And in addition to the capital costs, there are operating cost impacts that will need to be considered within the reality of the concessionaire agreement for the Canada Line as a P3 project. So that would be part of any discussions we have with TransLink and the concessionaire. The second question was, is this station in the Mayor's transit plan? No, this station is not currently identified within the Mayor's Council 10-year transportation plan, but City staff plan to work with TransLink staff and investigate ways to include the station within future upgrades or future updates to the regional transportation plan. And there was a few questions concerned and concerns raised about the future of bus service along 57th Avenue, and I believe it was specifically highlighted by Councillor Affleck through a question to a speaker. The introduction of a frequent bus service east-west through Marpool is something that staff and residents have been keen to introduce for several years, and that concept was further reinforced through recent planning work in the neighborhood. Although the arterial connection of 57th does terminate at Cambie, this does not preclude options for transit on 57th that would help serve Marpool. Although further design and evaluation work is necessary, staff believe that a route along 57th, which connects to Langara 49th, for example, would perform quite well in the interim. And these two developments provide a very significant stimulus to provide those services. A similar example of this is the number 33 bus, which has a very strong connection to the King Ed Canada Line station, but travels primarily on 33rd and 16th, which don't have stations today. Furthermore, it's only until recently the region has been able to expand service within the region, so optimism for improving transit in Vancouver, particularly in Marpool, is much higher than 2 to 3 years ago. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Winterbottom.
Next, just to address the parks questions, we have Katie Amon from the Park Board.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Katie Amon from the Park Board Planning and Research Team. We had two questions. The first was, assuming the parkland, which includes the therapy pool, current therapy pool will be managed by the Park Board, have the Park Board and commissioners been asked their opinion on whether they support a replacement therapy pool on the park site? Park Board commissioners have been informed of staff discussions with VCH, but have not been directly consulted on the location of the therapy pool. Park Board staff have met with VCH and have indicated that the 2.5-acre park will not have sufficient open space to site a facility. The park's location was selected to maintain many of the site's most significant trees, and the park will be serving a large population, many with mobility limitations and caregivers, which necessitates large areas of passive space, seating, and ample well-graded pathways. The second question we received was, will designs for the urban farm include an enabling garden, including a heated clubhouse and protected access for Pearson residents? Early discussions include an accessible heated space within a 500 square foot indoor space and adjacent covered outdoor space for up to 30 people. The decision for the farm to become a Park Board asset was made fairly late in the process, and Park Board staff will be reviewing and continuing to revise the design guidelines as the process moves forward.
Okay.
Thank you. That concludes our answers to the questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much for all those responses to Council's questions. I've got Councillor Louis on the queue, I believe, for next steps.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am prepared to move the staff recommendations, including the changes that were presented to Council in their memo of July 25th. Should be on table for you. Normally be a yellow memo, but it's white today. And there are a number of changes in the memo which I think captures a lot of the discussion and sentiments of Council when we were asking the questions, specifically about the new therapeutic pool and our ability to ensure that the pool is in fact delivered and when anticipated as well. And you'll see the language has been adjusted from previous language in the staff recommendations, and it clarifies that in fact up in the recommendations it lists a number of, I think, positive attributes of this development proposal, including the number of social housing units, 179 social housing units that are turnkey, or that are 361, and land available, space of land available for another 179 social housing units. 69 space childcare, adult daycare, 2.5 acres of park, 1.1 acre for farm, and I think very important, which is the provision of medical space that is in dire need of renewal in our city as well. There is one addition to the memo that I've submitted to the staff, which provides some additional clarity. If the staff could just put that up. This is a note to the applicant to ensure current standards and service levels are maintained. VCH should demonstrate through future design development that public access is maintained to the renewed therapy pool facility. And so that's just to ensure that we were clear on council that we heard from the public that they were concerned about public access to a pool, that therapeutic pool that apparently doesn't just serve the city of Vancouver, but a much wider region as well is very important. And given that there are very limited opportunities for these pools within the city, in fact, the region, small ones perhaps in other locations, but not publicly accessible, that is something that council is very interested in continuing to provide as part of this new facility. I will leave it at that for now, Mr. Mayor. I think the project is a good project. Thank you to the applicant, to staff and community for working us through this process. Obviously, the model of healthcare provision was a key point right from the beginning, that there was a division of the type of model that should be had on this site. And I think being not healthcare professionals, except for one who doesn't, Councillor Dr. Jang, who's not here today, but other than that, I think we should leave the ultimate decision on the healthcare models to the healthcare professionals. I do want to thank all the speakers in regards to that, though I know that I've personally visited Mr. Polcon's residence and see the value of what he is describing. But again, being not a healthcare professional, it's hard for us to judge where the advancements and techniques of supporting those in that segment of our population should go. So we will leave it, I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Louis. So we've got, we need a seconder for that. Councillor Deal seconds, and Councillor Ball to the motion.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to clarify the phrase current standards, meaning that standards now or standards at the time that the pool is actually completed, because they may change. So I'm just wondering what that actually means.
Sure, current standards referring to what is on the site currently.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, if we could, Councillor Louis, just do a quick clarification there.
Mr. Mayor, just for clarification, there were in fact two memos that was yellow, dated July 17th, which should also be included as part of the main motion that I'm moving.
Thank you for that. Councillor Ball, did you have more?
No, I'm delighted to support the recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor DiGenova.
Thank you. I have some concerns with Councillor Louis' addition. I don't have concerns with, I believe, what the sentiment of it tries to achieve. I have concerns that when we speak about public access, we're talking about public access for persons with disabilities, and I'll discuss that with staff afterwards, but this is just not a public swimming pool like Hillcrest, or for people living on the site who perhaps wouldn't be needing that specialized care. I think with that being the only therapeutic swimming pool in the region, it's important that it be open to the public, but for those who most need it with disabilities. So I'd just like some clarification on that to make sure that we're not talking about making it a public pool. So there's public access, but it would be to a specialized group of individuals who would need access to that. Other than that, I'd like to thank staff. I know many of our staff have worked on this for years. The Pearson Dogwood redevelopment, there's been questions about Pearson Dogwood for years. I know that there has been a number of opinions sitting on the Persons with Disabilities Advisory Committee as first the Park Board liaison and now as Council liaison. I've seen some very colorful debates regarding the Pearson development and what makes one person comfortable with their care and their living situation might not make sense to another person. That's why I also would like to say that I appreciate that Vancouver Coastal Health has done individualized plans and has allowed those residents to direct their own care. So those who'd like to live in more of a greenhouse model, which I'm happy to see, not 12 separate rooms anymore, it's 4 to 6. We've still received letters as counselors saying that 4 to 6 units is too much. For some people, they might feel that way. For others, that might be the safety and the comfort that they require. So for those reasons, I think that it's fantastic that there are a number of different situations. It's not that cookie cutter. And I'm hoping that we'll move forward in seeing Pearson and the redevelopment and the care there look different than it has before. I know that many people have branded it as an institution, especially if we look back decades ago. It was an institution. The nonprofit that I actually happened to work with, it was 3 young men from George Pearson Hospital who went out and got a small grant and decided they wanted to live in the community. That's great, but community living isn't for everyone. There are a number of people who really enjoy Pearson Hospital, and although they're not here today, I'd really like to thank and extend my thanks to all of the people who did come out from George Pearson. I know that that must have been a struggle. Some of those individuals, I understand, probably don't come to community events or to speak very often, and that they're very medically fragile, and it could mean a matter of life and death if they don't have the proper care. So I just wanted to, although they're not here today, echo my thanks to them. I'd like to thank the Persons with Disabilities Advisory Committee and the Seniors Advisory Committee. I know that there have been several hours. I don't want to count them up, although I'm sure Kathy Brown and Colleen McGinnis probably have more of an idea than I do. I think that it's time to move forward. It's been a struggle for me, this decision, and one of the reasons is because I have received letters from people. We all have. Mayor and council have received letters. We have heard from individuals who might not support this or feel fully on board. But do I think we'll ever have 100% consensus on this? I'm not sure that we will. I think that this is an excellent step forward in bringing us into the modern day of integrated resources for persons with disabilities, shared care models, also independent living, and to give those residents the options to stay on site or whether or not they'll move off site. So I wanted to mention that. I'm also extremely happy to see that the pool will be on site for those individuals who've chosen to live on site and for others in the community. I support public access for persons with disabilities who live outside of George Pearson. I would never want to see that pool monopolized or used for the general public or people living on the site in market units who perhaps could make their way down to Hillcrest or another pool. So that's why I asked that question. So as long as that clarification is there, and I'm not basing my vote on that, but I would like that comfort just to make sure that we're talking about making sure that it's used by those residents, prioritized by the residents and those people in the community, those nonprofit organizations and individuals who really need that. So I see that I'm out of time. Again, thank you very much to staff, to all of the residents, all of the stakeholders who have put so many hours, months, and years of their lives into this.
Thank you. Councillor Carr.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Well, first of all, my very sincere thanks to the public, to the members of our advisory committees, to our staff, to Vancouver Coastal Health for the work done on this proposal. It's come a long way since we had that infamous meeting where people came in droves to say this is not the model of care we want. It was the first time in my experience on council where a proposal was sent back to staff for a rewrite and a lot of extra work in terms of developing a sort of set of new principles in terms of moving forward. I also just want to note that that the amount of work and the number of hours that have been put in by people is really unparalleled from what people have said. This has really been a very involved and very, very thoughtful process. The model of care that we all learned so much about, the United Nations Greenhouse Model of Care, I'm happy to see is embedded in the proposal that we have in front of us, and that there has been a real attention to the recognition of and support for as much independence as is possible for residents, and as well as a sense of community amongst people. So I'm happy to see the responses to my questions today that verify that there is, even though the units may not be as large, the groupings of units may not be as large, there is a real thoughtfulness around the placement of those groupings so that a larger sense of community can be maintained, as well as the services and the activities that I think have been expressed to us are so very important to the people who are currently living at Pearson. I also just want to make sure we're all very clear that we had some people express the fact that they felt there wasn't going to be a place for them in the new building, and that's not the case. We've had that very much verified, and I just want to make it quite clear that the conditions of approval actually state that the needs of all existing Pearson tenants must be met before any units be offered to non-Pearson residents. So that's very reassuring for me. The one issue that I think is still, outstanding one, I'll deal with the pool at the very end. The one issue that's outstanding is really the fact that this development has a great deal of density, and that has been linked through discussions from the beginning with the fact that this is a transit-oriented corridor. And that 57th Street station was pivotal from the beginning. We all thought it was going to be there, and there's uncertainty now, and I really appreciate the response of staff to my questions, that there will be a diligent pursuit of this with TransLink staff to try and work that into the 10-year mayor's plan. I think that plus improved bus service are really, really essential. We heard that from many residents. Finally, I just want to say that the information we've received about how many people have written to us or sent in petitions and spoken to us kind of boiled down to almost 50-50 pro and con, with now the big exception that so many people were speaking against the proposal to begin with, and in the last number of, right up to the very end, because they were very uncertain about the therapeutic pool being left on site. And so thank you to Vancouver Coastal Health for agreeing to keep that pool on site. Thank you for the change in the conditions of approval. Well, it's not even a condition, it's written right into the actual proposal now, that therapeutic pool will be on site. And that I believe really will tip the balance much more in terms of people being in support of this. So I am happy then to lend my support and vote yes for this.
Thank you. Councillor Reimer.
I had a few things I wanted to note to thank staff. I think there are two pretty significant, I mean, it's a large area. We've been talking about a piece of it, but it's a large area, so I can appreciate under any circumstances it would be a lot of work, but I think threw in, I'll call it an innovation into this one, because I think it was innovative, but certainly added complexity to a complex site. And that was this idea of bringing sort of healthcare related policy, trying to be a bridge through the Seniors and Persons with Disabilities Advisory Committee, sort of across VCH to the community groups that we have some contact with. I would say that going into the hearing, I think one has inclinations in their own lived experience, and I might have been more inclined to support a model with more independent living. I live independently and I see great benefits in that. I do from time to time economically have to live with roommates, and I can appreciate the challenges of being in a position where you don't have a lot of choices around that. At the same time, public hearing is about hearing people, and I think the second innovation, the video, was fantastic. Having that opportunity to hear directly from the people affected really impressed upon me how broad the viewpoints are for people in terms of their living situations. And all the speakers on video really stuck with me in considering the material and supporting the pod or group models. I appreciate the mother who came and spoke on some of the other family members who, it was obviously quite an emotional issue for them, the safety of their family members. And I went from going into it feeling independent was the only way to go to thinking, geez, maybe we need some larger units in there too. So I think on balance, it provides the appropriate compromise, given that those are the bookends on it. Ultimately, it's not really up for me to decide how people want to live, and providing them options and opportunities is really what the proposal looked to do. I thank Councillor Louis for the pool amendments. That obviously was something that came up quite strongly. I will say for myself, well, I think it is important to replace an on-site. It did impress upon me the need to start thinking about, just as we think about disability access to other kinds of recreational facilities, that we should be thinking about transit-oriented access to this kind of amenity outside of the Pearson site. But that's for another day. On the bigger project, the other pieces, 2,700 residential units, 540 of them affordable housing is a substantial gain for the city. The childcare I'm always excited about, especially excited in this community because it is a bit childcare deficient. There are larger community impacts, and this is where phasing and all the points made about the access to a transit station come in. Those are not for today, but to note that this is a project that staff will continue to be working a lot on, and we appreciate that work moving forward. I did want to note, Councillor DeGenova, if it helps give you some comfort, the language that you were concerned about that might create broader public access actually came directly from staff. So if that helps your vote today, I would appreciate your support on that item.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Deal.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I am going to support it, and I'm going to offer my thanks as well. That was quite a meeting where we sat here and I learned about the greenhouse or the green homes design, which I didn't know anything about until then, and the fact that some of our biggest proponents came back and said that this is better than the consensus. We had some of the people who have been most deeply involved in the process coming out with real support, as well as expressing some concerns, which we heard, and I think transit is one that we're all going to be working to get you success on that one. There should be a station there, and we're going to keep working and get one there as soon as we can. The pool, I think, has been very well addressed, but the fact that this one site has been asked to provide so many amenities for so many different types of people, I think is amazing, and I think it's been done very well, and I support the other comments that the other councillors have made in support of this process. And I acknowledge that some people that are real leaders in the community don't like this. I think that has to be acknowledged, but as we've all said, there's a variety of opinions and there's a variety of options on this site, and I think that it's been very well worked through, and I think the ongoing work with our People with Disabilities Advisory Committee and with capable people like Kathy there will help to make sure that the work continues to be responsive and respectful of the people who it serves to serve, as well as all the other people who will be living there, including the social housing component. So I support it, and I thank everybody for all of their careful work and future work on this proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Deal. Councillor Stevenson.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. And Josh, I think back to many years ago now when some of us went down to have a look at the possibilities on that site and walked around, spent the day, well, 2 or 3 days, and how far we've now come and the vision that lies before us. I'm very supportive. I'm so pleased that so many were able to come out and speak to us. And I too have one major concern, and that's transportation. That's clearly coming from our seniors advisory committee and others that we really need a station there. And so I think staff have heard that loud and clear, and now all we have to do is impress some other people with that and look at how much money is this indeed going to cost us. But in the meantime, this is very exciting, and it's going to make a huge, huge difference in so many people's lives over the next many decades. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I will be voting in favor.
Thank you. And Councillor Ball, did you add something?
Yes, thank you very much. I'd just like to mention that the hearing actually had more people in wheelchairs than I believe we have ever seen in the chamber. And it was a perfect example of all those people braving the difficulty of getting here and also the difficult situation in here. And I'd like to thank them for their kindness and coming to speak to us, but also in making us aware of how difficult it is to plan for space and how when we look at the future, We have to be aware when we're planning our spaces so that it is possible for many people in wheelchairs to be able to come in and not end up having to be crammed together. So I just want to thank them for their patience and their kindness to us and putting up with the difficulties and still speaking to us and letting us know the important issues. So thank you to all of them who are here. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ball. And I'll just add my brief comments and strong support of the motion. And again, thank all those involved, all the residents at Pearson Dogwood and families and friends and everyone in the health sector who have vigorously advocated for improvements and change and investment. And there's been lots of lively debate about exactly what that looks like. I think we've got a great next step here. There's certainly been compromises, and I appreciate all the cut and thrust of that. It's been a little challenging to get here over the years, but I think it's great that we are on the verge of approval, I believe. Hearing from council so far, it looks promising, and I thank the applicants and staff for all the work to address all of the concerns that have been raised in the community, and whether that's specifically with the site and current residents, or it's with what the changes look like for the neighborhood, the Marpole neighborhood. There's obviously lots of work being done on this, and the city's advisory committees have worked really hard on this as well. So lots of appreciation to everyone involved in the process. I would just say, speaking with my TransLink hat on, I'm very hopeful that we do see a station there on the Canada line, given all this growth and all the new residents that will be on the site and in the immediate vicinity. So the question is really how we can afford this. And I am hopeful with a new BC government that there's an opportunity for some of the windfall that was cashed out on this public land by the previous government can be reinvested in making sure there's a rapid transit station there on the Canada line, as we have all expected, I think, over the years since the Canada line was built, that there would be a station there. Clearly there was a major windfall from the sale of these public lands to the provincial government, and ideally we can see a reinvestment of some of that upside into the public coffers back into transit and ensuring that residents there have great access into the rapid transit system. So that's a piece that we'll have to work on going forward, and again, resources will be the challenge when there's a lot of other priorities around the region, but this is catching up for a station that frankly needs to be built in conjunction with this level of growth and a new population coming into the area, and I'm hopeful that we can see an advance on that front. So we'll keep working on that, and I'll close it there, and we'll go to the vote. All right, we've got unanimous support, 9 votes in favor of the motion, the recommendations. So we have approved that item. Thanks again to everyone who has been part of this whole process with Pearson Dogwood, and those who made it here today and are tuned in online. Thank you very much. Okay, so we go from there to hearing from on the rest of the reports that council held for debate or questions of staff. And the next one up is administrative report number 5. That's the Vancouver Waterfront Initiative. Councillor Reimer, you wanted to bring that one back.
Well, to be fair, I actually would have loved to have passed it on consent. I just was saving a speaker a very long, potentially 12-hour day yesterday, or tomorrow, sorry. See, it's already been a long week. But since we have the report here, I might ask a couple questions of staff, particularly, well, I should back up a bit. Last week I did a public event at SFU, so there were some questions that arose from the public, so I can pass them on to you in this venue as opposed to an email. The first one was around real-time sewage reporting. There's a very keen interest in the particular segment of the public to have that information, both the recreational users, the secondary contact folks, as well as people working with the river keepers. So any information you have on what it would take to do that would be helpful.
Thank you. Danielle Roberts, Director for Water Sewer for the city. We have started to look into putting some real-time monitoring. At the moment, we're concentrating our efforts and our funds into doing the separation itself rather than doing the monitoring. So we're always trying to accelerate the separation to eliminate the problem altogether. To put some real-time monitoring, we'd have to come up with a study to really understand the level of effort, where we'd have to put some remote sensing devices and then be able to read them in real time, and then to enunciate this information in some way. So we'd have to come back to council with a report, if so directed, to give you some more information.
Okay, that's helpful. And the one piece that might be a little easier, because we know when it happens, is when the overflow, our own system overflows into False Creek. Is that something that could be published when it happens as opposed to after the fact?
Again, we don't have that information real time. We use by proxy the events that happen with Metro to determine that it happened to us also, and to quantify the volume of the discharge.
Okay, great. Can you explain why a hydraulic model makes sense for you? Hydraulic model and water quality performance model makes sense to you as the next best step?
Yes, for it's poorly understood, the flow of water into False Creek. We know that the tidal effects don't necessarily flush the entire False Creek area, and we're recommending to do a model so we can really understand how the water flows, the effects of temperature, and the monitoring the quality of the water to better understand what needs to be done in the future.
Question on recommendation B, the floating swimming pool. So in the first recommendation A, you actually are designating money and looking at moving forward on that in the next. Should this be approved, you'd get going. But the swimming pool, the floating swimming pool, there's no money attached to that. So could you explain what we would be enabling if we were saying yes to that recommendation?
Hello, it's Nick Page from the Park Board. I think there's quite a bit of complexity to deciding how we can move ahead with a swimming pool, or a floating pool, I should say. And so discussions with Park Board staff and RFM staff, basically we haven't got far enough along to put a figure to what the pool will cost. So the 200,000 is really a flexible number to do the assessment work around siting, the technical studies, how it will conflict with other recreational uses, the range of issues that we need to deal with. So that's a fairly, I think there's a range of 100,000 to 200,000, so 200,000 was put in the report.
And Park Board, the governance body, has stated policy around seeking outdoor pool sites, from my memory.
Yes, that's correct. I'm trying to think of the specificity of that direction, but yes.
My memory was it not necessarily that specific. So then, citing a pool on land versus water, I would assume one has some value because you're not encumbering land that's already being used for something else or that costs money.
It's a little more challenging than you think in terms of putting a water-based pool. There's other jurisdictional issues. I mean, we do not own or control the seabed or the water column that it would sit within, so that's a challenge into itself. The facilities in terms of pumping and filtration and things like that take up land space, so there's basically the same costs are probably associated both a land-based pool and a water-based pool.
But we would maintain limited land for other uses.
It's true, it has fewer conflicts, though keep in mind the eastern basin of False Creek has a lot of competing uses as well.
But the only way to know all of this for sure would be to say yes to this recommendation and find it out in more detail.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Carr, questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So my questions will first follow up on the very last question that you were answering, which is around the pool, the floating pool in False Creek, and also the swimming beach in East False Creek. First question, how much communication was there with Park Board, both Park Board staff, but elected Park Board, around this proposal for the floating pool and the new swimming beach?
So I have not been directly involved in the Van Splash initiative, which looked at pools and distribution of pools and other recreational facilities related to water. So I can't speak specifically on all the updates that the Park Board has received. There is, again, a range of policy direction to look at, what are our priority options, and I believe that the floating pool was one of them, both in False Creek and also looking at the Fraser River.
Okay. I remember the one Fraser River, if that's true. This one, this is not on my radar. In terms of the beach, now I have been privy to the consultants' reports from the development of the Northeast Falls Creek Park extension, and what that sort of all looks like on the shoreline. And my memory serves me correct, there were like a little inundations and there was marshes, and so are we somehow coordinating with that fairly long way along consultation process around the development of the park in that area?
So the conceptual plan for the shoreline has kind of two large grassed areas and two indentations, yes. One being more of a salt marsh and more around habitat, and the second one being more around public use. And this is obviously early days in sort of combining this idea of a swimming beach in that area, but it is compatible with the concept that's already proposed.
Okay, yeah, I sort of remember the pictures. I've seen the presentation more than once, yeah. Being big boulders and people sitting on rocks.
Exactly. I think that level of detail in terms of things like substrate and gradient and access, I think is still being worked out. I mean, there are real challenges around, the design team dealing with something as large as the water quality challenges and concerns in False Creek and how that can be integrated into a design.
Right. So right now, False Creek has got the worst water quality around, and we know it says in the report that there is, we haven't had too many beach closures. Or they're rare, but they are very common for Sunset Beach at the mouth of False Creek. And certainly we get reports. When I hear people are worried who are dragon boat paddlers are putting their hands in the water, so I'm wondering why False, not that in the long term False Creek might be a place after we do a lot of work, but what about Crab Park, which is a fairly well utilized park? I mean, is that one that might be on the list too to continue, although there are issues around the port, of course?
So Crab Park was identified in the staff response to the Waterfront Initiative as an opportunity that we're looking at in the short term. The inner harbor was closed for many decades because of poor water quality, both related to combined sewers as well as industrial use, and that seems to be improving dramatically. And if you look at Crab Park, has been sampled by Metro Vancouver and Vancouver Coastal Health, similarly to the other swimming beaches, and at least through 2016 and early 2017 has been consistently below 50 mpn per 100 mils, which is 200 is the cutoff where the beach would be closed. So it's as good a water quality in Crab Park as many of the west side beaches. So we're looking at that as a sort of a quick start opportunity for improving swimming, not just in Vancouver, but specifically in the downtown east side and those areas.
Yes, I think that's a well-used and
well-loved we've looked beach. At as well the beach substrates. It seems to have lots of desirable features as well. It's not a
Regarding the water quality initiatives, there was a report to council at False Creek Water Quality Working Group was referenced, and I remember in that particular report I made an amendment which was specific to look at increased enforcement around sewage dumping from boats. And that was, of course, liaising with the federal government. How is that coming along?
Daniel, do you want to take that one on? Or Mark?
Hi, Mark Schwark, Manager of Sewers Drainage Design. So I sit on the False Creek Water Quality Working Group, yes. And that topic has been discussed extensively at the group itself. We've got representatives from multi-jurisdictions. There is a challenge with getting the enforcement out. We've got representatives from Transport Canada at the group, and they talk about the enforcement activities, etc. So the topic is still top of mind. I think our recent initiatives about the no dumping within False Creek will help, but that enforcement is still a challenge.
Okay, well, keep on there, keep diligent. Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. And back to Councillor Reimer.
Yeah, I'm ready to move a motion if there's no more questions to it.
Yep.
I'm happy to read the recommendations and the report from staff. I am very excited to see it come back so quickly. I have to admit, I was a bit surprised to learn how little we know, to know how little we know. Not because we're bad at knowing things, but just without some kind of initiative, we don't know things. And until we get the hydraulic model and water quality performance model done, it becomes pretty much impossible to deal with False Creek. Falls Creek, to Councillor Carr's part, the original initiative looked at all available natural water bodies in the city of Vancouver, both inland and river and ocean, whether it be Falls Creek or inlet. But this one really is repeatedly subpar or actually quite dangerous, so it would make sense to me that we start here. We also understand the other ones much better in terms of the hydrology and hydraulic and water quality issues that we need to understand to be able to take action. I'm very excited about the opportunity for a swimming beach at Northeast Falls Creek. I think if someone would have told me 10 years ago that that would ever be possible, I don't know that I would have believed it, but I think it does speak to the possibilities when we open up our minds to what is possible, and understanding that for thousands of years, that's what happened around here. So it's not that this has never been done before. I know the floating swimming pool, I have to admit on my, it sort of shows up as a question mark in my head when I look at it, but I do think given the park board priorities that have been addressed, if this is a way to merge our priorities with their priorities in a way that is an effective use of taxpayer dollars, it gets people outside and swimming and gets them habituated to the idea that it's okay to want to swim in a natural water body, even if they're not doing it in that exact moment. And understanding that some of our foreshore swimming now used to be this kind of swimming. They used to be enclosed pools and got moved over time as water quality increased. So I do think there's a strong social value to it that the park board has already identified. So excited to support it, looking forward to next steps on this, but also the other water bodies so that we can get people back in the water and all the other things that are healthier when we have healthier water.
Thanks, Councillor Reimer. And I'm happy to second that and speak to it. I'm very strongly supportive of this. Thanks to staff for coming back quickly and for that powerful combination of city staff and park board staff working on this. I'm hopeful we're going to see really good cooperation from our provincial and federal counterparts in the intertidal and into the ocean itself. Noting these are basically, particularly East Falls Creek is really inland waters for all intents and purposes, and it would be good to have jurisdiction here in Vancouver to be able to do what we can do best with those waters, make them swimmable and restore some habitat, swimming beach, barge pool. I'm excited at the possibility of the barge pool, particularly because if we move quickly along to building a good swimming beach, and with great water quality right in Falls Creek there, that the barge pool can move to another site somewhere, maybe on the Fraser River, maybe on the in the inlet. But there'd be some flexibility if we have an asset like that to put it where it can make the biggest difference and enable people to swim somewhere along our waterfront. So I think there's multi-use potential to that if there's a good business case for it. But really appreciate the quick work done by staff to bring back these immediate actions that we can take, and remain hopeful that they can deliver great swimming in the near future. And there's no doubt there's a lot of work to do and a lot of challenges with the water quality in Falls Creek, but we have to rise to those challenges. There are people using that water, an incredible number of people using that water every day, particularly in the summer. Lots of us that are in the ocean on a very regular basis at our beaches, and it's great to see progress made over the years with infrastructure investments and sewer separation and monitoring. It's great to see beaches like Crab Park now be on the verge of swimmable. Hopefully the park board can kick into gear there, and we can see that be an official swimming beach. But it's I think there's every reason to believe that if we set our minds and our resources to it, that we can achieve this in the near term. So thanks to staff, and we'll look forward to the next steps coming back. And we're ready for the vote on the waterfront initiative. And we have 9 votes in favor, unanimous support for the motion. So that carries. Thanks again to the staff team and to Councillor Reimer for bringing it forward. We're on to the next report, which is policy report number 2. And that's Councillor Carr, I believe. Let me get you queued up here. And that's policy report 2, which is introducing character home retention incentives and new housing choices in RS zones, single family zones. Proposed amendments to the zoning and development bylaw. Councillor Carr.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So I have a few questions. My first one is around multi-conversion dwellings, so MCD. All of the single-family zones would be under this allowed MCDs, which changes the nature of single-family zones, allows for stratification. I want to know if we've done any analysis and if we can report back on any analysis on potential impacts on rental. Whether this will decrease the amount of rental if we move to MCDs and permit stratification. Shall I just go through the questions? And and you know what? I can also email these to you. There might be one that I want to have a particular response.
Councillor, in general, clarifications today would be easy, but the questions will be great. We can return with information at the public hearing.
Okay. Yeah, most of it, I think I would imagine it's going to require more. Maybe a couple can be dealt with now, though. A second, on page 8 of the report, it talks about it being difficult to determine how many homeowners will pursue retention versus tear down. So I'm wondering about the process of developing the public opinion surveys that we did, and whether or not we contemplated actually testing for that, like going out and asking people, well, if we do this and we do that, if there are these disincentives, these incentives, would you be more interested? Was that part of the conversation or process at all in terms of thinking?
Afternoon, Mayor and Council. Marco D'Agostini, Senior Heritage Planner. So we did present in the last go-around of the public consultation many of the options, including the infills, the opportunity to stratify, and do multiple conversion dwellings. Their findings are in the council report, but if I recall, they all achieved more than 70% of the respondents supported those options. So that's the directive that we brought forward to include those amendments.
Right, yeah. I guess, yes, okay. But maybe just to clarify, if we did or didn't ask them specifically, would you be more willing or more interested in retaining if there was this? But I guess that's just explain that a little further for me when we get to it. Thank you. We have, and it's unclear to me, it looks like what it is primarily on new builds, tear down and new builds, there are 4 units typically as an option that could be done on a lot. And it increases, so it increases to 8 if there's a assembly, right? But it looks like 3 units on a retention of a character home. I just need clarification on that. And I mean, certainly at the time of public hearing, I think to be very clear about what the potential for new units are.
So in reference to the RS changes being proposed,
yes,
under the current zoning for new development, there are no changes being proposed as part of this work. So it would be 3 units that you could have, which is in your your principal dwelling, you'd have your 1-family dwelling and a secondary suite. The opportunity to have a laneway, which is a rental unit. Nothing's changing for the new developments. The optional incentives that are being proposed for character retention do allow for more units. Typically, on a 33-foot lot, we'd be looking at 3 units, which could be rental or strata through a multiple conversion. Larger lots may be able to accommodate some additional units.
And is that, so, okay, make sure that that's clear. It wasn't clear to me, it sounded like the 50-foot lots on new build was potentially 4 units, but is it also for retention?
It's only for retention. There's
only
no
for retention,
builds.
Okay. All right, that's great, thank you. Also, in terms of retention for, I lost track of where I am in my questions. The character home review was part of the Heritage Action Plan, but we added in new housing choices, like after we did the sort of first public review on it. And I'm really interested in knowing the analysis of whether or not we actually shifted onto new build, by shifting or by adding in the opportunities for new builds, increased density, that may have shifted away from the emphasis on retention. Like somehow we've lost a balance so that it's no longer as many incentives versus there's not as many incentives and less disincentives.
Perhaps I'll reply by saying the incentives are only available for retention. There's no change, again, just to repeat, no change for any new builds. So it's always when you're retaining a character home that you can avail yourself of the opportunities that are proposed.
Okay, great. That's my questions.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Deal.
Yeah, thanks. Just a couple of questions as we're sending this to public hearing. I'll just ask you to make sure that these are answered at the public hearing, because I don't need to have the answers now. But one of them is around the potential neighborhood impacts. It talks about reducing the floor area would have a greater impact, but it's not recommended as part of this report. It does come forward almost every time we have these conversations. It's just don't allow that large house to be built. So if we could have a little bit more information on why that was not included as a recommendation when it comes to public hearing, I think that would be useful, because it often comes up. The second thing would be around the fact that someone who has a heritage home could now go the character home route instead of the HRA route, and the home is not protected as a result. That concerns me, and maybe we could make sure that we've got some checks and balances on that. I know we have the 1-year monitoring, but if we could, I'll be asking at the public hearing about ways to ensure that this doesn't cause a real drop-off in HRAs as people choose the character home route instead, and therefore don't fully protect the home. Those are my only 2 concerns. I'd be happy to move the recommendations to send this to public hearing.
Okay. So moved, and seconder for that. Councillor Stevenson will second. Anyone want to speak to the motion to refer this to public hearing? Okay. We need to go to a vote queue on this. Yes. Vote on screens, please. Nine votes in favor, unanimous support for the motion to refer that. So we sent that to public hearing. Thanks to staff for all the work on that, and we will look forward to that public hearing coming soon. Next report is the final one that's being held is policy report number 3. And again, that's the increasing housing choice and character retention initiatives in the Mount Pleasant and Grandview Woodlands communities. Proposed amendments to the zoning and development bylaw. Councillor Carr, you requested that.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My first question is really about the the surveys, and I talked about the options for retention versus incentives to retain versus disincentives to new build, and how the balance is being struck on that. So I'm wondering, in terms of in the actual feedback, it said there were, when I read the public summary, the summary of public input, it said that that the incentives for Grandview Woodlands particularly, incentives for retention are not sufficient. So again, I'm wondering, that is to retain. So again, how did we get at testing or understanding whether the public was going to land on retaining? If we could test for specific individual, this is good, this, I like this, I like that, or not like this, not like that. But overall, was there any way that we could have tested for whether that package would have been enough to get more people to retain versus tear down and new build?
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Joyce Yusugi, planner with the Vancouver Midtown Division. In terms of testing, staff did undertake some analysis of the proposed new forms that would be allowed through the zoning amendments. So for example, the proposed amendments are in large part intended to allow for more housing choice on our standard size lot, so 33 feet by 122 feet, which under the current zoning and regulations are limited in terms of being allowed to allow for the 3 units that the new regulations now allow for. So we looked at HRAs that have taken place in these communities on similar size lots and feel that the proposed FSR is achievable, and with some changes to the guidelines. For example, removing a side yard requirement, it would enable more of our standard size lots to take advantage of the incentives to retain character homes.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer
it'll
your
come
question?
up again more, but thank you. That does answer the question. In terms of, again, a similar question to the last report, in terms of the multiple conversion dwelling option, was it explained in any of the surveys? And I did go to the public open house, but I can't remember this, that this is really the vehicle for stratification rather than just simple rental. Like, how was that presented to the public in a way that they understood that MCD, as opposed to, for example, what happens in RS zones, which can have a secondary suite program, which retains rental, may lead to fewer rentals?
Certainly, in the consultation, at the consultation events, we did have illustrations of the proposed development options. And in the report, in Appendix E, there is an updated illustration of the development options that would be enabled through these zoning changes. And they do indicate rental and or ownership options.
Okay, great. Okay, so it's Appendix E. Thank you. In terms of the RT 5 and 6 design guidelines, can you explain to me why, and I'd like to have this at the public hearing as well, why the design guidelines that are very strong around reflecting historic character are retained for RT6 but not for RT5?
Partly as a result of the Housing Vancouver and the Housing Reset, the RT zone review did take into account the objective to allow for more housing choice. And sorry, I lost my train of thought. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
The question is really why would the RT5 design guidelines change versus RT6 remain the same? Yeah.
So in the RT6 zone, we recognize it as a special character merit area, and we have retained all the architectural and streetscape guidelines that currently deliver the strong character development that we see today. In allowing, the intent was to allow a little bit more flexibility in the RT5 zones. We heard through the public consultation that there was a mix of opinion on the desire to allow newer buildings to look more more modern, as opposed to retaining the character aspect. However, noting that the approvals process will continue to be a conditional approval process, staff will be able to review the designs that come forward.
I'm out of time, but I can send the other ones to you. Thank you.
Councillor Reimer, questions?
For public hearing, it was be helpful to have something that clearly articulated the engagement. Sorry, I can barely articulate the question properly about it, but I've had some questions from the public because they might have come through the Heritage Action Plan door or the housing door or the Grandview Woodland door, and it's hard for them to sort of follow how it went through those 3 processes and potentially others to get here. So if there were some kind of Venn diagram or something that kind of, or even a matrix that said, like, here's how we got to this conclusion to recommend this to you. The other thing that would be helpful, recognizing those 3 4 if you count 2 separate plans, but you've got a plan plus heritage action or character review plus housing. To understand which goals this moves from each plan would be really helpful. Okay. I don't need that right now.
We can bring that forward at public hearing.
Great, thank you.
Okay, no more questions. Councillor Deal will move the referral, and a seconder for that. Seconded. Any discussion or debate on the motion? Councillor Carr.
Yes, yeah, I really thought a lot about this report, Mr. Mayor, and particularly, I didn't ask staff about these questions, but I read the report specifically around the public consultation and the fact that in some cases the meetings were between Grandview Woodlands and Mount Pleasant were sort of lumped together, well, one was anyway, and so it was hard for me to understand how the community might have responded differently if they have had 2 separate meetings. But I'm taken by the fact that we did all receive an email from the Grandview Woodlands Area Council really asking us to not refer this to public hearing at this point, but to take a little bit of extra time, and then looked at the actual data coming out of the survey in Grandview Woodland, where I found that the responses were pretty evenly split. Like there wasn't really decided overwhelming support. I mean, and because we're doing both areas at once, it wasn't so much the case in Mount Pleasant, but it very much was in the Grandview Woodlands area, which raises a lot of concerns for me if you have a community that's basically not there in terms of decidedly supportive of the recommendations coming before us. So I won't vote for referral at this point in time. I really do think that there should be more time spent working with that community in particular to make sure we land our recommendations that reflect the general will of the public there.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Reimer, to the motion.
Thank you. I feel quite strongly about this getting to referral. Every community plan has outputs that you need to enact by sending them to public hearing after the plan is passed. In the case of Grandview Woodland, they have actually been delayed because of the urgent housing crisis, because we wanted to do the housing update, or that seemed important to staff, and I think that's reasonable and fair. But this is actually a delayed report already from what would like in the case of Downtown East Side Plan, we had the recommendations back within a few months because this is simply actioning a piece that the community told us in the planning process they wanted to see done. So I actually think we've acted, I wouldn't say in bad faith, because who could have predicted the housing update timelines and all those things, but I feel that we're already on the edge of good faith in regards to the planning processes themselves. Certainly Mount Pleasant has been waiting a very long time for these. I think we passed that in 2011. Yeah, it's been an unusually long time, and I don't feel that at this point, given the substantial amount of consultation that led to the recommendations in the plan, subsequent consultation, and the related 2 processes, which are unusual and have only added to the consultation, that more consultation prior to public hearing is going to lead to a different recommendation from staff.
Okay, that's all for speakers to the referral motion, so we will go to the vote to refer this to public hearing. Okay, we have 8 votes in favor and Councillor Carr in opposition. Motion carries, so we have referred that piece to public hearing. We'll see that again soon. Thanks again, staff, for all the work. We'll see you again soon on this front, I'm sure. Okay, so that is it for the reports that were held for debate and questions to staff. And we're on to bylaws. So we have 21 bylaws on the agenda for consideration by council. And I'll ask first and foremost if any member of council wishes to hold any of the bylaws for debate, separate vote, or for conflict of interest. And specifically, I'll check in with some of you for bylaws 5, 6, 11, 12, and 17. Council members who are not in attendance at the related meetings may only vote on the bylaws if they now confirm they have reviewed the proceedings, which includes viewing the related video clips. Bylaw 4 is a public hearing enactment bylaw from a hearing held May 17th, 2016. Councillors Louis, Stevenson, and I were not present at that hearing. However, on July the 11th, Councillors Louis and Stevenson advised they had reviewed the proceedings and they are therefore eligible to vote on the bylaw. And bylaws 5 and 6 are public hearing enactment bylaws from a hearing held May 24th, 2016. Councillors Jang, Reimer, and I were absent from that hearing. So Councillor Reimer, I'll check with you first. Have you reviewed the proceedings from that hearing? Will you be voting on those bylaws? Okay, and just to be clear, I will not be voting on bylaw 4. I forgot to ask myself that. Bylaws 11 and 12. Public hearing enactment bylaws from a hearing held January the 24th, 2017. Councillor Louis, you were absent from that hearing. Have you reviewed the proceedings and will you be voting on the bylaws?
I have reviewed and I will be voting. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Bylaw 17 is an enactment bylaw from a public hearing held October 20th, 2016. Councillors Affleck, Louis, and Reimer were absent from that hearing. Councillor Affleck, have you reviewed the proceedings? Will you be voting on the bylaw?
I have reviewed and will vote.
Okay. Councillor Louis? Yes and yes. Councillor Reimer?
No, I have not reviewed it.
Okay. So I need someone to move adoption of bylaws 1 through 21. Councillor Deal and Councillor Stevenson seconds. Any debate? All those in favor of the bylaws? Any opposed? That carries unanimously, and the list of approved bylaws can be viewed on the city's website. We are on to administrative motions. There are 5 which are to be moved by Councillor Reimer and seconded by Councillor Stevenson. Any debate on those motions? All those in favor of the administrative motions? Any opposed? Those carry unanimously. And that means we're on motions on notice. The first is a request for leave of absence for personal reasons for Councillor Deal from any meetings to be held July the 27th, 2017. Would someone move that? Councillor Ball and seconder. Councillor Stevenson. All those in favor of that? Any opposed? That carries. The second motion on notice is replacing market rents with rents tied to income in Vancouver's DCL bylaw, which Councillor Carr will move, and that needs a second. Councillor Stevenson, and we have received... Okay, it's already on there, then that's you. And we've received a request to speak to this motion. So should council wish to hear the speaker, we can refer the motion to Standing Committee tomorrow, Policy on Strategic Priorities. That's 9:30 start, but the motion will obviously come much later than that, given the agenda. Would someone like to move referral? Councillor Stevenson moves referral, a seconder for that. Councillor Carr. And all those in favor? Councillor Louis on referral.
Mr. Mayor, there's been some correspondence between ourselves and Councillor Carr on our motion. There appears to be some willingness to move forward on this. I would rather than subjecting, I think there's 2 speakers now on this matter, unless they're opposed. It appears that there's some support for this, to do some investigation at the very least, send it off to staff as part of our overall work that we're doing on housing, and get them to work on it, rather than subjecting perhaps a couple of people to several hours, perhaps many hours of delay hearing from many speakers on the other issues that we have to deal with tomorrow. And so certainly at council's will, but my suggestion is that we, in fact, take Councillor Carr's motion, make a minor amendment to it, and then send it off to staff. So that's my position on referring this off to hear from speakers, but perhaps Councillor Carr has an opinion.
Okay, thank you. Councillor DiGenova to the motion.
Well, knowing that there are 2 speakers, I feel that the speakers may have already planned their day tomorrow, and they hadn't been told that the first speaker perhaps had withdrawn. So I feel that it's up to Councillor Carr, but I always would like to hear from speakers first before making any decisions, especially considering Councillor Louis saying that he has that there may be an amendment to a motion that has been circulated. So for those reasons, I'd prefer to hear from speakers, but it's Councillor Carr's motion, so I'd like to hear from her.
Okay, well, we've got a couple others on the queue now ahead of Councillor Carr. Councillor Rammer?
You know, if a speaker can plan their day around tomorrow's agenda, I would love to talk to them because we have 12 items on the agenda now spanning about 50 speakers. And I don't think anyone could plan when the last item is going to be coming up, and this would be referred to the end of it. Given that the motion asks for information, and I think having that information would allow both council to be more informed in the debate as well as any speaker who may come to speak to it, I think it would be both the humane thing to do to the speakers, who otherwise will be here for, I'm guessing, upwards of 10 hours tomorrow, waiting for their turn to be heard. And at that, I have no idea. It could be many more hours, or perhaps there will be no questions from council tomorrow, and we'll have a much quicker agenda. In any event, I think that given the nature of the motion asking for information, I would be pleased to support asking for information in order that we could have an informed debate on it when the information is available.
Okay, Councillor Stevenson?
You know, I actually agree with Councillor Reimer and Louis on this. I just think it's unfair to put somebody through that doesn't know. I think if you gave them the choice now, do you want to be here all day or figure out and or get the information and come back and speak to it at a later time, seems more prudent. I mean, not for us particularly, it's just one more, but for them, it's, I wouldn't be very happy myself if I found out later, well, it could have gone on and then got the information and come back again. It's just such a long day tomorrow to wait around.
And Councillor Carr?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Well, this is a very difficult decision. As you know, I am always supportive of giving opportunities to the public to speak. I do have a question. Perhaps the city clerk can answer it for me. How available is the information to individuals about the timing of our agenda and items on the agenda? Like, I know that you do post timing, but generally is it impossible tomorrow?
Councillor, we indicate when a person signs up to speak, we let them know that it's the prerogative of council whether to refer the item to committee to hear from speakers, and we let them know that once it has been referred, we will tell them where it is on the agenda. But unless council sets a specific time for that item, there's no way we can inform them as to the time. We tell them that they can follow along on Twitter, or they can follow along on the live stream. But that's about all we can do.
Yes, and you are able to correspond with these individuals, Madam Clerk, in terms of you've got emails for these?
Absolutely. As standard practice, that once council refers an item to hear from speakers, that we reach out to the individuals to let them know whether it was in fact referred to hear from speakers, and that they are in fact signed up.
Right. Madam Clerk, and perhaps council, I'd be willing to support this. I know this may be an unusual request, but I would like to be able to communicate with the individuals to provide the reasons being that council was willing to support this and that they have an opportunity to email mayor and council, and I'd be happy to sit down with them also, just so that they know that there are people willing to hear them. It's just that it's a very difficult agenda tomorrow, and to ensure that they don't spend many hours here. If that can be part of the communications that I'm able to do, I'd be supportive of this move. Okay, then I'm supportive, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, well, at this point, just procedurally, we have a motion to refer this, so I think we'll have to fail that motion and vote against the motion and consider a motion. Next steps. Councillor Affleck.
I just have a question for Councillor Carr, because I don't know who these people are who are coming. I don't know. Well, I don't know if they're speaking against it or for it. So I think we should. I know it's painful, but I think we should prefer it.
Okay, and well, with that Don't have any more speakers, so we'll call the question on referral as a next step. Noting there may be an ensuing motion. Okay, we have 3 votes in favor, and then Robertson, Louis, Stevenson, Deal, Reimer, and Carr opposed. So the motion referred does not carry. And that means we go back to the speaking queue. I've got Councillor Louis.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I stated, I'm generally supportive of what Councillor Carr has put forward. I have sent the clerk an amendment to Councillor Carr's motion. I believe Councillor Carr has seen this as well. It's to strike the with recommendations and changing it on potential changes. So it's not presupposing that Council's decision on and presupposing what the information will yield in terms of research and feasibility testing that staff might undertake, provide clarity that we are talking about new for-profit affordable rental housing in the motion. And so that with those changes, hopefully Councillor Carr will accept those as friendly, but with those changes, we are happy to support this and send it to staff as part of our overall housing reset initiative to have them report back to us in a timely fashion.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Louis, seconder for that. And to the motion, Councillor DiGenova.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate Councillor Carr putting this forward. I had some issues with the original wording of the motion stating something that I find a little bit ironic that says affordable for profit because I think to the general public that's a little bit hard to understand, but understanding that those are terms and terminology that our staff is using under the housing reset, and perhaps that's a question that I'll have to ask of them. I think that the more research we do on this, the better. I think that there's a potential for more research. I appreciate Councillor Carr bringing this forward and asking for some research overall on this to try and help us achieve more affordable rental housing. I think that there's room to go even further and see how our fees, our development cost levies, CACs, the city's schedule of development fee document, which is quite long but very interesting read, does actually affect the price of market housing and non-market housing. In fact, I'm just going to note that nonprofit organizations have to pay upwards of $70,000 for airspace parcels, and that's just their fee to the City of Vancouver. So I appreciate that Councillor Carr, I think, has taken a very good first step here in looking at this, and for those reasons, I will be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carr.
Yes. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Well, I didn't get to introduce the motion, so I might as well just conclude. That first of all, I appreciate that I was approached by a number of fellow councillors on this, indicating support, wanting some clarification. I appreciate that interest and the desire to make this motion as effective as possible, and absolutely believe that the research that will be done is essential. I, as you know, was extremely excited to hear in the Housing Reset report in March the switch in focus so that that we will be tying affordability to incomes, to family status, to neighborhoods or location, to housing forms. But that tie to family to household incomes was incredibly important to me. So this is just an attempt to see what we can do in our actual rules, in the bylaws, that and in this specific bylaw, the DCL bylaw, which allows for waivers, and Councillor DiGenova is absolutely right. I used the wording that is in that DCL bylaw, which may sound convoluted, but or oxymoronic. That the affordable for-profit housing, rental housing, is indeed the language in that bylaw. So this is an attempt to get at that policy directive, which will create the more right housing that I think we and the residents of Vancouver are so desperately seeking. So I'm happy to see the support of my fellow councillors on this. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Carr. We're ready to go to the vote on this. Councillor Stevenson, are you working on it? Okay, there we go. Unanimous support, 9 votes in favor of the motion, so that has carried. Thanks, Councillor Carr, for bringing that forward, Councillor Louis, and for the little creative workaround. And hopefully the communications with the speakers is successful, so they know where things stand and next steps. Okay, that means we are on to a notice of motion, new business inquiries, and other matters. We have. Yeah, we're just starting on that. That's what notice of motion and new business inquiries and other matters. We have one item of new business, which is a request for leave of absence for personal reasons for Councillor DeGenova from the reconvened public hearing to be held this evening. Would someone like to move that motion? Moved and seconded. And all those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you. And I'll start out with one item of new business, which is to congratulate our clerk here, Laura Kazakov, on her impending retirement after 25 years here at the City of Vancouver, 20 of those here at City Clerks, and incredible service and patience through many long meetings, many long days and nights, and we've been privileged to work with you in your capacity as clerk here, and wish you all the best for retirement. I hope it's more riveting than some of the meetings we've been through together. But thank you so much for your quarter century of service to the city and the people of Vancouver. Thank you.
You look too young. Way too
young. The tell-all book. We can get a team photo right after the meeting too. Okay. Yeah, we'll do that in a minute. Okay. Thank you, Laura. And we'll go to the, would you like to make a parting speech? That's okay.
Well, I'm definitely not a public speaker, but I would like to thank everybody, and it has been a privilege to work here with all of the existing councillors and mayor, as well as all the former councillors and mayors that I did have the honor of working with. You know, I have mixed feelings about leaving.
It's bittersweet. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Laura, and good luck from here. We still have to finish this meeting, so we're not quite there yet. So we have Councillor Carr first on the queue. New business, notice motion, other matters.
I think I was a retention, but I wanted to go on the queue anyway, so I will. But I think good, thank you. First of all, Mr. Mayor, I would like to mark the passing of a very remarkable person within Vancouver in the art community, specifically music community, Bobby Taylor. He was 83 when he passed just recently. And for those of you who don't know, see, I remember his hit, and I am aging myself, in 1968, Does Your Mama Know About Me, sorry. That was his band, Bobby Taylor and the Vancouvers, which had Tommy Chong in it, who co-wrote that particular song. And so he was part of the music scene here, and it's a very vibrant part of that sort of Motown sound. Secondly, I wanted to just thank everyone, Mr. Mayor, who has been involved in the Drummers Calling Festival, putting that festival on. And I know I just saw the city manager there the other night, Sunday night, I believe. And I've gone a couple of times. I would encourage anybody in this council chamber and in the city at large to get down there. It's free, and there are the most remarkable performances. Dancing, a lot of singing, and I was very, very lucky on Saturday night to personally be able to be introduced to Buffy St. Marie, who was a real hero of mine. So I'm really grateful to staff who enabled that to happen and who really have done a remarkable job in putting together that festival. Buffy who? And finally, Mr. Mayor, though, I'm going to just ask you a specific question. I was rather surprised on the weekend to hear your announcements around some of the housing initiatives of the city that I wasn't aware of. And so like this affordable housing project, and we've had some general information about it, but the specifics of it, I've not been privy to. So I'm just wondering how that happens. It happens that you announce some very specific details around a pilot. I knew there was going to be some pilots around affordable housing, but there's some pretty specific information in here that have not gone past me as a councillor. So I'm just wondering how that happens.
So the staff brought these forward and obviously circulated them to council, and then were posted publicly on the website for next steps. And Communications wants to roll out information so people are aware of what's in these reports, bring more profile to them. So when I can do an announcement like that with city staff, just to make sure people hear it, see it in the media, and can plug in and obviously participate and engage as council considers next steps on these policies.
Yeah. Well, perhaps, Mr. Mayor, I can get the help of somebody, city manager or whomever, in finding where I might have missed something coming to me. I did get some some general information that we were going to have some pilots, but none of this specificity, unless I missed something. And I can miss emails at times because we're all so busy. But if I could just find that information, find that email or wherever it was circulated, whenever it was circulated to me that I might have missed, I'd appreciate it, because I do like to know about things beforehand, but rather than just seeing them announced, not knowing the details myself.
Okay, yeah, we can confirm the trail on that. Maybe the city manager can follow up on that front with communications. And Councillor Reimer's next.
Thank you, Mayor Robertson. I wanted to start by thanking staff. Tracy Morrison, who the mayor read condolences for at the beginning of the meeting, passed away tragically and suddenly and completely preventably last weekend. But to say that staff at the city were really incredibly generous with their time and with the support that they gave the downtown East Side community. And to say that going to the memorial and seeing dozens of our staff there and hearing from the family, who she was somewhat estranged from, that they had no idea of how well loved and respected she was. It meant a lot. So I did want to pass on the thanks. Second piece, I also was going to mention Drum is Calling. I didn't get to see Buffy, but I did get to go to the opening ceremony, as well as attend the Gathering of Canoes, sort of at the broad Canada 150 plus event. So we had the Gathering of Canoes on July 14th. And then the opening ceremonies on the 22nd of July for the Drum is Calling. It's incredible to see. We've all heard from the three nations, the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh, how important it is for them to be visible on their own territory. And you can kind of feel this. It's almost like watching a living thing open up to see the visibility increase, but also what it's done for the nations and for members of the nations. And when I've gone down to Drum is Calling or Facebook feeds or Twitter friends who are Indigenous, whether they're of the three local nations or not, to see the pride expressed is just incredible. I appreciate it's not without controversy. I have equal, well, maybe not equal, but certainly different individuals, social media posts and others who are quite critical of the money being spent on Canada 150 plus, and generally the federal money that was spent on Canada 150 and then our own spending of it on 150 plus. But that was kind of part of the point, was to have a discussion about Canada's anniversary of Confederation that was different than the one that was sort of the path of least resistance for the past 150 years. So I welcome that discussion, and I'm glad to see it happening. I did want, though, to also note for Council the Walk for Reconciliation on September 24th, which is the sort of end or the capping event of the 150 plus. It would be fantastic if we could have unanimous Council attendance at that. I think it would be an incredible thing. And if you do have people in your networks, organizations, arts community, kids in schools, wherever it is, you know this from your own time out in community, people are looking for an invitation for a way into a discussion about reconciliation, and the walk really is that invitation. So I know staff sent out a piece that you can forward on. I might ask that staff send it again so that we can continue to get it on the radar screen. There is an opportunity working with Reconciliation Canada to engage groups of people, so whether they're churches or cultural communities, whatever it is. So yeah, I'd love to see us meet or beat the numbers that came out in the pouring rain some years ago. Last thing, I mentioned it earlier in the meeting, but just to note one more time that tomorrow I will be looking for a motion to vary the agenda to get the largest chunk of speakers up near the top past the housing issue. If anyone has any issues with that, if you could talk to me as soon as possible, because I know clerk has advised the speakers to come early in the morning, early, not prior to the meeting starting, but earlier in the agenda in anticipation of varying the agenda.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. But just to remind people that it's that time of the year again. Pride Week is coming up. And in fact, the launch will be at Jim Diva Plaza on the 31st. So that's not very far from now, Monday the 31st. And you're all welcome. Please attend if you're able at Jim Diva Plaza. It'll be quite an exciting kickoff. And then the parade, a little later than usual in August this year. It's the 6th of August, just before BC Day always, but it's Sunday the 6th. And the city again will have a float in it, and you're welcome to ride along in the float or walk beside it. There'll be lots of staff there, as well as the GLBTQ liaison committee will be there, and so on. I particularly, though, wanted to thank the Pride Society, as well as the Vancouver City Police and the Chief of Police, and Black Lives Matter for being able to come to a place in their discussions where everyone is included in the parade, and the police are not going to be wearing firearms this year, and everyone seems to be pleased with the final outcome on this. There have been a few voices that still are concerned, but the Pride Society, the police, and Black Lives Matter have had extensive discussions this year, and so we'll be carrying on with the parade, and everyone is welcome. Obviously, this parade is about inclusivity, and it always has been about inclusivity, and it's always a balance between the political statement and the celebration. And those tensions have been there as long as I've been involved in this community, and probably will go on for some time into the future. But in the end, it always has been a great celebration while still making political statements. So I hope everyone's able to make it out and enjoy the entire week with all the various festivities that will be going on. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Stevenson. Councillor DiGenova.
I just did want some clarification, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Reimer had said that the most amount of speakers would be moved up to the first item on the agenda, and I'm just wondering, the second item on the agenda? Okay, so I'm wondering then if there's the most amount of speakers, if Councillor Reimer might be able to explain why we're not moving it up to the front of the agenda, and why we wouldn't make that regular practice instead of just doing it for one or two motions. often we'll have motions. Actually, I remember a few weeks ago, we had speakers wait until after lunch, and they were a large chunk of speakers. So if Councillor Reimer would like to introduce a new policy, I'd be able to support that. But to do it just for one item and not other items, I think is unfair. And I think that there's speakers that perhaps had a certain expectation, who have watched council meetings before and felt that they kind of knew where they fell on the agenda, knowing that the agenda can be varied but isn't very often, just to accommodate the largest chunk of speakers. So I'd be able to do that if we were going to do this in practice in the future, for an itemize items on the agenda based on how many speakers they have by the time we start our Wednesday meetings. But if we're not able to do that, then I wouldn't be able to support the agenda, because varying the agenda, because I feel that it may put certain speakers in front of other speakers who thought that they would be before them on the agenda. So I'd be fine to entertain that as a policy in the future. But if it's just going to be for this one day and this one item, and we're not going to do this in the future, if there's a large chunk of speakers, then I find it difficult to make an exception for one item and not others. Thank you.
Okay, and Councillor Reimer, you have a little bit of time left.
Thanks. I appreciate the heads up on the varying the agenda. But to clarify a few points which had some inaccuracies in them. First off, I'm, as noted at the top of this meeting when we referred item RR2, it was my intention to refer it to the second item through varying the agenda, because that's when it must happen. I did not chair the last meeting. My only interest tomorrow is to have a smooth, efficient meeting in spite of or in aid of council and your decisions about what you'd like to do. In my opinion as chair, this is the most efficient way to get through the meeting. Passing a new policy that would amend the procedure bylaw, in my opinion, is not an efficient way to get through this meeting, so I'm not going to take you up on that offer, but I appreciate the heads up that you will be voting against varying the agenda.
Okay, I see no more speakers with new business or inquiries, so we need a motion to adjourn. Councillor Deal will move, a seconder. Councillor Carr, and all those in favor of adjournment. Any opposed?